In our Most Buffalo story of the day, a familiar face in a place you don't usually see her. Ordinarily, Jackie Albarella takes us to the garden. But today, we followed her to the Buffalo History Museum to experience her exhibit, Artifacts, Burchfield-themed photographs. The series features photos of collages she's assembled from renowned watercolorist Charles Burchfield's life. It's a more personal peek into the man behind the name so well known and loved in Buffalo, a man who lived right next door to Jackie when she was growing up in West Seneca. We had the chance to hear more about that experience and this work it inspired.
Jackie, this is such an incredible exhibit. It's a very personal exhibit, and I'm wondering how you describe it and how it sort of came together.
Thank you. It came together because I'm a hopeless hoarder of things, and mostly, things that have to do with my family or my growing up. I actually started to put together pieces, and I thought of this whole thing about artifacts, telling stories with artifacts and with visuals. So I started taking pieces of my growing up, and living next door to Charles Burchfield was such a huge part of my growing up. And then we moved into his house when my mother bought it. So I thought it would be fun to combine artifacts from my family and then also some of the Burchfield family artifacts that we found in the house when we moved in, and create these little stories, visual stories. And so each one of the pieces tells a different story. When I brought them all together, it was super fun because I got to see these little stories that encapsulate a certain era in my growing up years and my young adult years and my relationship to Charles Burchfield, who was our neighbor.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to see, we're kind of talking about that he was very thoughtful, very mindful person, but then there's also all kinds of doodles of just things that he would just draw on the fly.
Yeah, he was like a crazy doodler. There was doodles everywhere. On the wall of the studio, there were doodles all around the phone. Now some were numbers, but then around that number there'd be like a doodle around it, a face or a tree or something else, a flower. And really, on every wall of the studio, there was just little doodles that he, and then every piece of paper, as you look at the ones that are more precise, these doodles actually were a way for him to think about thoughts and to think about ideas and to try and formulate what's the piece going to be that I'm going to create next. When you look at some of the doodles, you can actually see it was the beginning of a specific piece.
When you were a kid growing up, you didn't immediately understand who your famous neighbor was. But
No.
now as you kind of reflect back and you look back at your childhood and your growing up and you clearly have your own artistic eye, what do you think the impact of having the artist next door was?
I see some similarities in his work and my work because we both are like really tied to nature. Was it because I spent time in that studio? When I was very small, I would go with my mother over there to water the plants when the Burchfields would go away. But then as a teenager, when we moved into the house, that studio was my clubhouse. It was a great clubhouse. So, I don't know. But it wasn't really until I got to be older, I thought, oh, well, yeah, that was cool. He had a studio. It was the space where he created his work. This is where he worked. I like to think he, being my neighbor, had somewhat of an impact on me and why I became an artist and why I do what I do.
This really is a fascinating exhibit. If you want to see it for yourself, I have good news for you. It's been extended here at the museum until the end of the month. You can learn more by going to buffalomuseum.org. And that is Most Buffalo for today. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Kate Welsh-Schofer. Be well, stay well. We'll see you next time.